Most women don't realize the precise moment they cease to be his desire, not because they became less beautiful, but because they abandoned the throne within themselves. She was radiant once, not merely by skin or scent, but by the silent gravity of self-respect, the kind of energy that bends a man's attention without uttering a word. Yet in the slow corrosion of time, many women relinquish this crown, not knowing they've placed it at the feet of a man too unevolved to even recognize royalty. He does not steal it. He never had the power to. She lays it down, willingly, through 1,000 tiny betrayals of herself. A queen is not lost in a single moment. No, she erodes under the weight of fatal mistakes. The kind Seneca might describe not as crimes of action, but of character, of misalignment with virtue, of forgetting one's nature. The first mistake is not obvious. It is not loud. It is subtle, like a shadow stretching just an inch too far. She begins to silence her inner knowing. Her intuition, once sharp like a blade forged in fire, becomes dulled under the pressure of appeasement. She senses something is off, the lack of effort in his eyes, the delayed response to her soul, but she overrides the signal. She calls it understanding. She calls it being chill. What she doesn't call it is what it truly is: abandonment of the self. He notices. Oh yes, he notices, not consciously, but through a psychic shift. Her energy begins to orbit his validation instead of her own solar force. And just like that, the polarity dies. The queen is no longer on her throne. She's now at court, performing. This is not love. This is the ego's hunger wrapped in the illusion of connection. It is what Seneca might warn against, the trap of being ruled by externals. She has allowed her value to be contingent on his perception, and in doing so has made herself unwhole. Do you feel it? That slow, creeping sense of erosion. It doesn't come like thunder. It comes like compromise. 1 inch of silence. 1 dismissed intuition. 1 smile given when your heart whispered run. And yet the tragedy deepens. The second mistake slips in when she begins to manage his emotions instead of expressing her own. She is the balm to his rage, the translator for his neglect, the alchemist of his indifference. She becomes so good at reading his moods, she forgets how to read her own. What once was a woman of depth becomes a woman of performance, not for the stage, but for survival. Her softness, once divine, becomes self-erasing. She calls it empathy. But empathy without boundaries is martyrdom in silk. It is the slow suicide of the feminine soul. The man, unknowingly, begins to retreat further. For how can he feel devotion to a mirror that only reflects his needs? The sacred dance requires polarity. He cannot be the mountain if she melts into the soil beneath him. Without resistance, there is no desire. Without truth, there is no fire. And fire, psychological, spiritual fire, is the breath of masculine devotion. Do you understand what's truly lost in these moments? It is not the man. It is not the relationship. It is her. The one she was before fear made her small, before trauma made her pliable, before the ache of being left made her overcompensate with presence. He may walk away. He may drift. But he does not realize he has already lost her, the true her, long before he leaves. What remains is a shell of performance, a carefully curated identity designed to be enough. But no woman can seduce deeply from a place of fear. And now, the third mistake waits patiently, as all fatal errors do. The queen, uncertain of her throne, begins to over-explain her worth. She performs her value like a courtroom lawyer, as if a man must be convinced to witness her light. She rationalizes. She justifies. She gives the resume of her soul to someone who has already decided not to look. A woman must never negotiate her worth, for in doing so, she tells the world she does not know it. And yet she speaks. She texts paragraphs. She unravels herself in the name of being understood. But the truth is, a man either feels her essence or he doesn't. No sentence can replace the gravity of aligned energy. No bullet-pointed list can command reverence from a man not rooted in reverence for himself. This is not heartbreak. This is misplacement of energy. This is what happens when a woman begins to earn what should be naturally recognized. The queen doesn't beg to be seen. She simply is. But when she forgets this, when she believes love must be proved instead of flowed, she steps out of the divine and into the desperate. And from that moment on, he no longer sees a queen. He sees a girl trying to be chosen. He may stay. He may even say the right words. But his soul has already left the room. Not because she wasn't enough, but because she made herself less, trying to be more.
A man does not always recognize when he's in the presence of a queen. Often, it's only in her absence that he feels the echo of what he once possessed, but never truly honored. This is the fourth mistake, the one that carves deepest. She believes potential matters more than pattern. She sees what he could be, the kindness buried beneath his confusion, the gentleness he showed once, and a fleeting moment of vulnerability. She clings to glimpses, to fragments. She builds a temple out of possibilities and calls it hope. But what is hope if it is rooted in delusion? Seneca would warn, expecting the world to treat you fairly because you are a good person is like expecting a bull not to charge because you are a vegetarian. In other words, character is not what someone says in their calm. It is what they reveal in their chaos. Still, she gives more. She invests deeper. She becomes his healer, his counselor, his confessor, thinking if she can just love him into wholeness, he will finally rise into the man she believes he is. But she forgets, transformation is not a gift one person can force onto another. It is a choice, a sacred, terrifying choice that must come from within. Her love becomes currency, and the more she gives, the less he values it. Not because it lacks worth, but because it's offered without demand, without pause, without standards. And this silently tells him that her love is unconditional in all the wrong ways. It will be there whether he honors it or not. There's a particular ache to this kind of erosion. She begins to feel invisible even as she's constantly present. She starts questioning her own standards, wondering if they were too much. She wonders if she should just be more patient, more understanding. And in doing so, she trades her crown for crumbs. But the truth is ancient. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's abandonment dressed in virtue. A queen does not build temples for men who refuse to rise. She does not beg the storm to calm. She steps back and watches who follows her into stillness. And still, many don't. Which brings us to the final, fatal undoing, the fifth and most spiritually costly mistake. She makes him the source of her reflection. She lets his gaze define her image. She waits for his approval before she feels radiant. She waits for his consistency before she feels safe. She waits for his affection before she feels lovable. The ego loves this because it gives the illusion of control. If he changes, she will finally feel worthy. But this is the ultimate illusion. Seneca would say, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." How much of her inner fire does she waste waiting to be chosen when she could have chosen herself? This is the point of no return, not because he leaves her, but because she finally begins to see. She sees the game, the dynamic, the subtle spiritual violence of measuring her value by the volatility of someone else's affection. And in that moment, she remembers. Not who she was with him, but who she was before him. A woman born of fire and silence. A woman who danced with her shadows and turned them into wings. A woman who no longer performs softness for the sake of being liked. She is soft because she chooses to be, not because she is afraid of being abandoned. She is not available to be conquered, only met. And when a woman remembers this, truly, in her bones, she becomes untouchable. Not because she no longer desires love, but because she no longer fears the loss of it. Her wholeness is no longer up for negotiation. This is where he truly loses her. Not in the argument, not in the silence, not even in the goodbye. He loses her the moment she no longer waits to be seen. The moment she reclaims her gaze and turns it inward. The moment she looks in the mirror and says, "No more." Do you feel that? That shift, that tectonic movement beneath your ribs? That's your soul realigning with your crown. He will sense it too. But by then, it's too late. The man who once held her in his hands now watches her rise, unreachable. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. She is no longer available for the version of love that asks her to forget herself. She will not punish him. She will not chase him. She will not explain to him what he lost. Because queens don't do autopsies on what couldn't survive their truth. She walks away, not because she stopped loving, but because she started honoring.
There is a quiet power in the woman who no longer seeks to be decoded. She no longer performs pain to elicit empathy. She no longer wraps her wounds in poetry, hoping he will read between the lines. She no longer lingers in doorways of maybe, nor does she beg the wind to return. When a queen finally walks away, it is not with anger, it is with awareness. And this awareness is not born of spite, but of sight. The ability to see clearly what was once obscured by hope, projection, and longing. She sees the difference between a partner and a project, between presence and performance, between love and trauma reenactment. This is individuation, the sacred path Jung described, where the soul reclaims its fragmented parts and returns to center. It is the death of the mask, the burial of the persona, and the rise of the true self. No longer does she crave fusion, she craves freedom. No longer does she chase security, she embodies it. No longer does she ask, "What am I doing wrong?" She asks instead, "Why did I stay where I wasn't seen?" For a woman who has faced her shadow no longer fears solitude. Loneliness was the cage built by self-betrayal. But solitude, chosen, empowered solitude, is the garden where she grows new roots. She no longer waters dead things. She no longer tries to awaken in a man the very fire he refuses to tend in himself. This detachment terrifies him, not because she's cruel, but because she's no longer accessible to his lower self. He may call her cold. He may say she changed. He may even come back reformed on the surface, echoing the words she longed to hear in past chapters. But she no longer trusts echoes. She only trusts embodiment. She listens not to apologies, but to alignment, not to promises, but to presence. And his presence, when measured in her new frequency, rings hollow. Because a man can only meet a woman as deeply as he's met himself, and she no longer dims her depth to match his shallows. Can you feel it? That reclamation of soul?
It does not roar. It does not beg. It does not perform. It becomes. Now something miraculous begins to occur. As she rises into sovereignty, the world around her begins to reflect a new law. Men of substance take notice, not because she seeks their gaze, but because her energy has become unmistakable. She does not need to ask for respect. It arrives unspoken. She does not need to defend her standards. They are felt. Her presence now demands reverence, not attention. She has shifted from needing to be desired to being undeniable. There is no game, no strategy, no manipulation, just embodiment. And from this place, she no longer attracts men who only want her warmth. She attracts men who can match her fire. But here is the twist. She no longer needs them to. For once a woman has found her own inner throne, she does not sit on it hoping for a man to kneel. She sits because it is hers. She leads not with seduction, but with self-possession. She does not dim her intensity to be digestible. She trusts that the right man will not only stand in her light, but reveal his own. And if he doesn't, she blesses him and releases him, not as punishment, but as liberation for both. Because love, when it is real, does not need to be earned. It flows between two souls who have done their inner work, who have met their monsters in the mirror, who have stood naked in their shame and still chosen to love themselves whole. Anything less is not love. It is longing, masquerading as intimacy. The Queen knows this now. She carries it in her walk, in the way she says no without guilt, in the way her eyes no longer seek permission, in the way her silence speaks louder than her apologies ever did. He watches from a distance now, maybe still in her orbit, maybe pretending not to care, maybe regretting, maybe rewriting the story to make himself the victim. But truth doesn't bend to memory. Truth echoes. And what echoes through him now is this: he did not lose her because she was too much. He lost her because he asked her to be less. And now she is everything without him.
There's an ache in every man who once touched the soul of a woman in her becoming and let her go. Not because she demanded too much, but because he could not yet meet the mirror she placed before him. A queen does not reflect fantasy, she reflects truth. And truth, when uninvited, feels like judgment. But her light was never meant to wound him. It was meant to wake him. Still, not all men wake. And so she learns the sacred art of non-attachment. She doesn't just let go of the man. She lets go of the version of herself who needed him to validate her worth. She buries the narrative that said her love could save him, that said her softness was the medicine for his madness. She sheds the skin of the rescuer. She emerges as the whole woman, not waiting, not aching, not apologizing. This is the essence of Stoic grace. Seneca taught that peace does not come from controlling others, but from mastering the self. She now understands. The ultimate freedom is not in changing him, it is in no longer needing him to change. The queen no longer clings to potential. She does not romance the possibility of transformation. She lives in reality, anchored, grounded, and discerning. Her love is still deep, still wild, still warm, but it is no longer available to the unready. And this changes everything. Because the woman who has claimed her worth no longer seeks a fairy tale. She seeks a partner in truth. She no longer romanticizes chaos as passion.
She no longer confuses mystery with emotional unavailability. She no longer tells herself stories to survive the inconsistency of another. She wants clarity, not confusion disguised as chemistry. She wants devotion, not desperation in disguise. She wants presence, not the ghost of someone who shows up only when he feels her pulling away. And she knows this now. The one who is meant for her will not need to be chased. He will come with a steady fire. He will arrive as she arrives, whole. This is the quiet reward of rising. The men who once made her question her enoughness begin to fade like smoke. And in their absence, a new energy enters. It does not rush, it does not impress. It matches. He does not want her light only to bask in it. He brings his own. And yet, she is no longer desperate for that union. She has found peace in the in-between. There is no more panic in her solitude, no more fear in her stillness. She no longer scrolls through old messages to feel something real. She no longer replays conversations, wondering what she could have said differently. That season is over. The ache has been replaced by awareness. Now she devotes herself to the temple within, the practices that deepen her embodiment, the quiet rituals of self-honoring. She moves through the world with a grace that cannot be learned, only remembered. A grace born from pain, refined through fire, and sealed by forgiveness. Forgiveness, not for him, but for the self she once abandoned. She forgives the girl who didn't know better, the girl who loved recklessly, who tried too hard, who gave too much. She forgives her because she sees the innocence in her need, the beauty in her longing, the sincerity in her effort. But she is not that girl anymore. She has buried the performative self. She has laid to rest the woman who needed to be wanted at any cost. She has stepped fully into her womanhood, fierce, unshakable, undiminished. And what of the man who lost her? He will remember. He will remember the way her presence softened his edges, the way her silence held space for his darkness, the way her touch reminded him he was more than his wounds. But most of all, he will remember how her absence felt like a sudden winter, the kind of cold that doesn't bite, but hollows. He may find others, he may even love again, but he will not find her again. Because women like her don't come twice. She was not just a chapter in his life. She was the mirror of what he could have become had he been brave enough to rise. And now she walks where kings are made, not of blood or lineage, but of consciousness. She no longer kneels at the altar of what if. She bows only to truth, to her own knowing, to the divine spark that lives within her chest and burns with unwavering steadiness. Because in the end, she did not just leave him, she found herself.
The woman who reclaims herself does not roar, she resonates. Her voice no longer trembles for approval, no longer softens for comfort, no longer shrinks to fit into the fragile psyche of a man unready to meet her eyes. Her words are velvet steel. They caress and cut in the same breath, not from cruelty, but from the unflinching presence of truth. And truth, once embodied, becomes untouchable. She no longer fears being too much. That lie has died, buried with the old self who once filtered her fire. Now, her too-muchness is her signature. Her depth is no longer a liability. It is a threshold, the kind of portal only the brave dare enter. And those who cannot, Let them walk away. She no longer grieves their departure. She welcomes it. This is the paradox of sovereignty. The less she needs, the more she attracts. But what she attracts is no longer chaos disguised as romance or distraction wrapped in charm. No, she draws in only what aligns, because now her energy is so calibrated, so centered, that anything out of integrity falls away without resistance, not as punishment, as natural law. A queen does not chase, she chooses. And what she chooses now is sacred, not flashy, not performative, not rooted in wounded desire. She chooses energy that speaks her language: consistency, courage, consciousness. She doesn't need his empire, she wants his essence. A man who doesn't flinch at her light. A man who doesn't interpret her boundaries as rejection or her silence as coldness. A man who sees in her a temple, not a trophy. But here's the alchemy. She is no longer waiting for him. She has become the very thing she once sought. She is her own protector, her own sanctuary, her own flame. The journey was not without scars. The breaking was real. The loss, the ache, the late-night unravelings, all of it carved her. But the wound became the womb. And now her power doesn't scream. It hums. It pulses. It commands without effort. This is what happens when a woman integrates her shadow. She no longer projects her unmet needs onto others. She no longer confuses pain for purpose. She no longer mistakes longing for love. She has retrieved the lost fragments of her soul and woven them into a crown. She wears it silently. There are no more speeches, no more proving, no more convincing. The ones who see, see. The rest dissolve into the distance, irrelevant. What remains is devotion, not from others, but from within. A fierce, tender devotion to her truth, her path, her healing, her joy. Not the kind of joy that requires an audience, but the kind that blooms in solitude, in the quiet moments where no one is watching. She dances now, not for the gaze of a man, but for the rhythm of her own spirit. She adorns herself not to seduce, but to honor. She rests not as reward, but as ritual. Her life becomes ceremony. Every choice, every breath, an act of remembrance. I am not here to be earned. I am here to be met. And when, if, a man arrives who can meet her, she does not test him. She does not make him jump through hoops shaped by past betrayals. She does not punish him for the wounds others inflicted. No, she receives him with open eyes and open hands. But her openness is not emptiness. It is discernment. She knows now, love is not proven in grand gestures, but in sustained presence, in the courage to show up, every day, not just in moments of passion, but in the mundane, the difficult, the honest. If he stays, it is because he is rooted. If he leaves, it is because he was never meant to stay. Either way, she remains sovereign. And this is where the story completes its arc, not with a reunion, not with revenge, not even with recognition. It completes with rebirth. A woman who no longer waits for a man to name her, because she has named herself. And so she moves forward, not untouched, but unbroken, not naive, but unguarded, not bitter, but boundaried. She carries the lessons, yes, but not the weight. The past is no longer her prison. It is her proof of survival,
of awakening, of return. And now she lives in her own legend. The man who lost her may never understand the cost of her absence. Or perhaps he will, years later, in a room filled with noise where none of the voices sound like hers. He will think of her, not the girl who begged, not the girl who bent, but the woman who rose and never looked back. Because in the end, the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.